So welcome to Embracing Miracles, and I'd like to welcome today Jane Duncan Rogers. Jane is the author of 2 books, Gifted by Grief and Before I Go, a handbook for preparing for the end of life. And Jane, welcome. It's so lovely
Thank
to have
you.
you here.
Lovely
Jane,
to.
Jane's the founder of Before I Go Solutions, which really came out of her journey with her husband as he was dying. And she's handed that company over and she's in a transition now, which I think we'll hear a bit more about this morning. So
Yeah,
it's just so lovely to have you,
yeah.
Jane.
Thank you.
And you've been on a very dynamic journey, beginning with Louise Hay, and perhaps you're back with her work now, having taken this long route through end of life work.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? Because I am now coming back, I think, into more writing and probably more speaking and perhaps some coaching, but I don't know about that yet. Which was all the work that I was doing before my husband Philip got ill, which was in 2010. And I had based my work then on the fact that I had trained personally with Louise Hay many years ago, in 1990, in fact. Oh my God. She was, it turned out to be her last training course that she personally was doing. So I was very fortunate. And actually, the result of that was that I brought her work in the form of You Can Heal Your Life study groups to the UK and Europe. And I was the first person to do that. So very honored. And it does feel like that is, those are my roots are in that kind of work. You know, Louise Hay was a very spiritual woman on the one hand and very practical on the other. And I have a tendency to be like that as well. And I really like the blend of both because after all, you know, that saying we're spiritual beings in a human body. Well, yes, there's the spiritual element and there is the human element. We have to be able to work with them both. So I can't speak directly right now what I'm doing other than I'm writing more and will be publishing more this year and do have a website, janeduncanrogers.com, which allows me quite a big space to do quite a lot. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, we look forward to seeing what unfolds.
Thank you.
But perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about what led up to the writing of your book, Gifted with Grief. You know, it's an unusual title, the idea that grief might be a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I have to first of all say that as a newly bereaved widow, if somebody had shown me that book, you know, probably even within the first few months, I probably would have just thrown it out the window because I didn't want to know anything about Gifted by Grief. I knew in theory that there might be some gift somewhere, but I wasn't ready to find it. Philip and I had been married for 20 years. He had been a psychotherapist. He had a background in the Osho commune. We were both on spiritual journeys ourselves, and as a counsellor, we connected in all sorts of different creative ways. We wrote books together, had all sorts of fun things like that happening. And then in 2010, he was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and anybody who's been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness will know that immediately you're transported into not knowing what's going to happen and not being able to fully plan a future, which is often how we live our lives. So there we were, forced to be in the moment, which of course, from a spiritual point of view, is what many people practice. But perhaps it's a high price to pay, getting a life-threatening diagnosis to practice that. But anyway, so after he died, which was about a year after the diagnosis, 14 months, I think, I knew that I would write about it because it was such a big event. And I had been already writing a blog, a regular blog. But I trusted that I would know when the time was right. And it was about 2.5 years later when I literally woke up. This is just like in the novels. I literally woke up one morning and I thought, oh my God, I've got to write now.
Mm.
And the first iteration of that was simply a mind map saying what was to happen. I didn't know what it was going to be called or anything. And then that was when I was on holiday. And when I came back, I started writing and it poured out of me. It was quite a cathartic thing to do because I was having to go back to our old journals, and I was including in Gifted by Grief some excerpts from my journal, but also from Philip's journal of the time. So it was a healing journey for me, really. And it was during that process that I realized that I had already been gifted by his death, really, but I thought Gifted by Grief sounded like a better title. And I did think, well, this is a bit out there and in your face, this title, but it's truly how I felt. And by the end of the book, I was able to actually say I was grateful for both his life and for his death because of all that I had learned. So yeah, that's how we got there.
Yeah. Well, I think even the title is a gift to people because it opens up the possibility of something arising from a very traumatic experience of loss.
Yeah.
And I think it touches without expressing it directly, but the guilt that we can feel surviving someone that we love, if we can find a gift in their death. I mean, it's a subtle thing, isn't it? That relationship between guilt and kind of the
Yeah,
moving on.
that's right. And people have mentioned that to me. Now, I didn't feel any guilt particularly. The thing that I felt was relief for Philip that he was out of pain. I can remember being there. He died in hospital and I was there at the time, but it turned out to be about 2 or 3 days before he died. And I can remember saying to myself, I want you, it's time for you to go. I could see that he wasn't coming back from this. And even though knew that I would be utterly bereft and I really didn't want him to die, I mean, of course I didn't want him to die. I didn't want him to be ill. I wanted him to be healthy, you know. I
Yes.
wanted him to come back after he died, but only if he was healthy, you know. So I had conditions to that. And so I did feel a lot of relief for him that he was no longer in pain. And that was very important for me. I didn't feel guilt, but I do know that other people can. And also fear. I didn't have a lot of fear. I had a lot of anger, huge amount of anger, but not a lot of fear. And other people have mentioned that they've had a lot of fear. So I think it just shows that grief encompasses a lot of different emotions, and we have to be open to whatever it is that happens for us.
Yes, yes. And I'm curious, how did you deal with the anger?
Yeah. I did a lot of stomping. I can remember stomping up and down the corridor in our house, shouting about how dare he abandon me, how dare he leave me alone. There had been an abandonment theme in my life, so I was experiencing it as another abandonment, even though I knew that was the last thing he wanted to do.
So the anger was directed at Philip.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
I mean, I think it's really it's daring to say that. You know, people are afraid to say that they're angry with their loved one for leaving them, and yet it's the truth of what many of us feel in those circumstances.
Yeah, and I think, you know, because we'd had lots and lots of conversations over the years about all sorts of things. And, you know, he'd had a background in the Osho commune. He'd been a follower of Osho for 20 years, right from the very beginning. And, you know, in those days, they did a lot of anger work, a lot of bashing cushions and stomping and shouting and screaming and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if they do that now, but that was his background. So I knew he would understand, you know. And to me, it was important to acknowledge it and get it out. And in fact, a nice little story. One day I was out in the woods. I was shouting out in the woods, not very loud in the woods because, you know, there might be other people around, but I was shouting and stomping. I did a lot of stomping. It was about 3 weeks after he had died, and I was just, I couldn't bear the thought that I didn't know where he was. I really hated that. So I shouted out, show me a sign, that an unequivocal sign if you are out there somewhere. So a little bit later on, I was walking past this sort of through a sort of meadow, and in the middle of the meadow is a copse, and I felt a strong pull to go into the middle of this copse. And so I did. And I sat down on a broken tree trunk there, and I looked up and I saw this dead tree trunk full of woodpecker holes. And I knew that was the sign because nothing else apart from the woodpecker holes, which were particular to me and him, a memory that we had had from a trip that we had done in the camper van over to California, and we'd camped in the middle of a pine forest with loads of woodpecker holes, and they were different from the ones over here. And we'd brought back some of the bark from the wood, and it just was like, oh my God, he really is out there. His energy is out there, and he's safe and he's well, you know. That helped. And that was as a result of being angry. So
Yes. So it opened you up to an experience with him.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it did. Yeah.
And as he, he didn't have long, by the sounds of things, between his diagnosis and his death.
Mhm.
How did his own spiritual experiences sort of shape that time?
He had been lost, I think. He had been lost for quite some years. He'd already been very ill with chronic fatigue and was not able to do very much, but hadn't found a way to uh, incorporate it into a life that he felt good about.
Mm.
Um, but from the day of the diagnosis, he just changed completely. He used it as a spiritual wake-up call, and the result of that was that in that last year, he healed a lot on a lot of different levels. It didn't translate to the physical level, but at other levels, spiritual and emotional and mental as well, mental
Mm.
health, I think he took every opportunity he possibly could to heal at that level, and it was wonderful. From that point of view, I refer to that last year that we had as one of the best ones in our marriage, even better than the early days, you know, which are pretty good usually.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really something to say of a diagnosis like that, isn't it? In fact,
Yeah.
I heard when I was very young, I heard um someone say that a diagnosis of cancer had been one of the best things that had happened to them. And I remember, I mean, I was probably about 14 or something, and it really made an impact on me. And I
Yeah.
guess I've spent quite a lot of my life exploring that.
Yeah.
um, that something as devastating and definitive as a terminal diagnosis can be, the possibility of transformation,
Yeah.
and that you
Absolutely.
you and Philip were able to embrace that together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we were. And I think also, you know, there was another thing that I did afterwards. After I realized afterwards that without knowing it, I had not had a fully open heart in our marriage. And I didn't really know that that was the case. And it was pretty open, but not 100%. So I made a commitment to myself that if I ever had the opportunity to fall in love again with somebody, that I would keep my heart wide open. And that felt like a way to honor Philip. So we'd had that conversation that you have, some couples have anyway, that theoretical conversation of, you know, if you die first, will it be okay if I get involved with somebody else? And we both agreed it would be okay if we did. Um, and that did happen for me, you know, as you know, I got married again, and boy, was I tested about keeping my heart open. That was
Right.
quite interesting. But and I could feel it. I could feel it. It's like it's not a physical feeling, but an energetic feeling of whether my heart was closed or open, or you know how open it was, you know. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So it's lovely to think of this connection that you have with Philip that has opened up into another relationship. Um,
Yeah.
it's again, it's one of those very sensitive places in our lives when we're reaching for another relationship after the death of someone.
Yeah.
Um, and to find that very gentle connection and that sort of experience that you've had with Philip as being something that allowed you to have a rich experience with another person too.
Yeah, and also when I met Ian, his wife had died, and so previously, some months previously, and you know, we had that in common. And actually it meant that for our first few dates, we didn't do very much other than talk about death and our dead spouses, you know, which is an unusual way to begin a relationship. But for us, it felt absolutely right. And still now we refer to the fact that Philip and Linda are with us in this relationship, because without their life and death, we wouldn't be together. And we're just very grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. 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 I mean, it's quite a complicated area, isn't it? You know, my children's father had a child who died before we got together. So there's a sense in which had he not died, my daughters wouldn't have been born. And you know, and it's sort of being open to the gift that his life and death brought. You know,
Yeah.
there was an opening there for
Yeah.
the children to follow. And it's finding that, like you say, the openness within the heart for that to just
Yeah.
be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and even though on the surface it looks like, oh my God, and lots of people would react to that. Actually, if you're willing to stay with the feelings and just go a little bit deeper, there's a whole other world that you can find that is nourishing and loving, and not just to us, but to everybody around us. So yeah,
Yes. Yes. It's much richer.
yeah, 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 it is much richer.
You were saying earlier that, you know, there's this sort of what you experienced with Louise Hay, the spiritual and the practical. And so we've been talking quite a lot about sort of being open to this spiritual undercurrent almost that takes place in our lives. But you've also done a lot of work with the practical, driving us on to create effective end of life plans. Maybe you
Yeah.
could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, of course. Well, the thing is, I published Gifted by Grief, and I had all these amazing, I thought, spiritual insights that I thought that people might resonate with, but it wasn't that they were interested in. What they were interested in was the chapter I'd written about the questions I'd asked Philip before he died, which were very practical ones like, what are your passwords and what kind of coffin do you want, and that kind of stuff. And after about a week, when about 8 or 10 people had said to me, I need to answer these questions too, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'll put on a workshop then, which is what I did here in my local area where I'm quite well known. And there were 12 people on it and another 12 on a waiting list. And I was like, oh, right, okay, I have to do something about this. Um, and it was later that year when, so I was still doing my ordinary coaching with helping small business owners to get better results.
Mm.
But at the same time, I was kind of developing this. And then in November of that year, so that was 2016, I needed to make the decision, was this going to be a proper company or not? And I set it up before I Go Solutions as a social enterprise. And at that point, it was to help other people make their end of life plans. But I discovered quite soon that people do need help to make them. And actually, there were quite a lot of people who wanted to train to be somebody to help, as you know, because you're one of them, the end of life plan facilitators. And I was fortunate because with the Louise Hay work, I had also developed a training for that based on her principles. So I knew what to do in terms of putting together a training. And I can't remember which one you were on. I don't think it was the first one, but anyway, it's
It wasn't
developed over
the
the
first
years.
one. It was
Yeah.
maybe the third one.
Right. Okay. So by now I developed this idea into, well, I had discovered really that actually not everybody was quite as um, willing to face death as I was. And I've
Mhm.
never really had a problem with it from even from a child. So, but lots and lots of other people can't go near it,
Yeah.
which always seemed a bit bonkers to me because, it's the one thing for that we know for sure, the one certain thing in a world of uncertainty.
Yeah.
So why are we not looking at it? But anyway, um, so the provision of other people who had gone through the training and gone through the what is required to really think about how to help other people get their act together, because people can recognize that this is a good idea in theory to plan ahead for the one thing that is inevitable, but actually doing it is another matter. And getting support to do that is absolutely invaluable. So yeah, that's how it developed.
Yeah, yeah. And I can say, having both done the training and now working as a facilitator, that practical work that we do to think about what kind of funeral we might want, or how we might want our body cared for, um, or what kind of decisions what we might want taken on our behalf at the end of life. actually really enriches our experience of living. Uh,
Yes,
and
yes,
it's a surprising outcome because it's quite daunting in the first instance. I found, when I began to write down what I might want, what kind of decisions I might want made on my behalf, I found it almost impossible to imagine, all these
yeah,
various scenarios, a road accident or some kind of heart attack, or, what could I possibly want? But as I've gone on and just allowed that unknowing to be present,
yeah,
those possibilities, like what's arisen in me is a sense that whatever happens will be okay.
yeah,
Whatever decisions the people around me make on my behalf will be okay. And they feel even more okay because I'm talking now to the people who are likely to be making those decisions.
yeah,
Uh, so my daughters, they know that I would rather less treatment than more.
mhm,
That's become a kind of thing. And we had a little kitten that was knocked over recently, and out of the kind of the burying of the kitten and the talking about it, one of my daughters said, "Oh, what would you want done, Mum, if you'd been knocked over?" And I just thought, oh, here we go. It's just become part of our normal
yeah,
like kitchen table conversation.
yes.
And that makes it so much less fearful. Uh,
Yes, exactly. And that was always my dream. In my mind's eye, I saw people sitting around a kitchen table or a meal table and being able to talk about death in an ordinary way, instead of it being the elephant in the room, which I also talk about. So, yeah, fantastic.
yes, yes. And what would you say to people who are feeling really overwhelmed and just very, very afraid of even the idea of death?
Yeah. Um, well, there's several ways to approach this. Um, first of all, be kind to yourself.
Mm,
And secondly, for the person who's wanting to assist you, is first of all, some people just can't do it, and that's okay. Yeah.
mm,
But also, if you start, like one of the very common things that people have said to me is that they can't bear the thought of not existing anymore. So if they get past the thought of death, then quite often another thought of, yeah, but I won't exist. So, why would I want to look at that?
yeah.
Understandable. It's understandable when you think about it like that. But if you are willing to use that as an opportunity to consider who am I, that question, and that's a very fundamental spiritual question asked by the sages over billions of years, probably. Um, who am I? And really contemplate who is this? I mean, I have contemplated it often over my life, but after Philip died, I contemplated it at a completely different level because, and anyone who's seen somebody or been with somebody in the process of dying will know this, that once they have died, their body is there. It looks the same as
Mm,
it did just a moment ago, but it's completely different. So
yes.
whatever it was that made them alive, what we call alive, isn't there anymore. So what is that? So
Mm,
I went on a big journey fairly soon after he had died to discover what it is that inhabits this body that's called Jane. What actually is the thing that
mm,
makes one body alive and another body dead? And that's what I wrote about in Gifted by Grief. So it can be, I would say, very much a spiritual journey. For some people, the uh, the focus on the practicalities will allow them to explore that, or the other way around. Focusing on the spiritual will allow also the importance of understanding that there are some practicalities to be taken off here, to be taken into consideration here. Um, but also, I think over the years of me working with people, it's usually the fear of looking at it that is worse than anything else. Because once you start addressing what it is you're afraid of, you realize that it's not quite so bad after all.
yes. 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 And I think I've noticed as I've considered these things more is that there are so many levels in which we persist. you know, like even, you know, because I've just thought a lot about people who have no sense that anything continues, anything of us continues. And having lived with a man who had a very strong belief that nothing of us continues, and observing his grief for his son with that, you know,
Mm.
framework, um as I've thought about, you know, what I might want done with my body, or what I might wish to do, you know, with family, um I've noticed that the body itself continues also, you know, as it breaks down, it also has a life of its own, if I can put it that way. You know, and I walk on the beach pretty well every day, and there might be the body of a seal or the body of a bird, or shells, you know, all these things that have been living that continue. Uh, so I've found there's kind of there's layers of richness in this experience of confronting death.
Yeah,
Uh, and and we can find ways of navigating it that really speak to our own hearts, you know, whatever we're drawn to spiritually. That there are lots of different places that we
yeah,
can find meaning. um
yeah,
but it's that first step of
yeah.
actually being willing to know on some deep level, to know that you're going to die, that we're all going to die.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, you know, when we open our eyes, it's around us all the time, like you just mentioned on the beach. You know, for me, I go out to the woods and you can see it easily in, even if I don't see any animals, right?
Mm,
You know, there's dead leaves, there's dead twigs, there's you know, new saplings, especially at this time of year, growing up, you know, little tiny weeny green shoots. So there's life and death all around us all the time.
mm.
And that includes in human beings as well. You know, it's just that's part of how it is. And but I do, you know, I have made a conscious choice to believe that there is something else. And I decided that when I was a kid, I decided that if when I died, I would either know something about it, in which case it was going to be wonderful. I decided that,
Yes.
or I wouldn't know anything, in which case it wouldn't matter. And that's really how I've kind of addressed it. Either way, it was going to be okay because I'd made the decision that it, whatever it was that I might experience after dying in this body, if anything, was going to be about a million times better than it is here, even if I think now it can't possibly get any better.
Yes,
And
yes.
that's a decision, you know.
Yes, yes. I mean, I did my work experience at the age of 15 in a hospice,
Oh,
and
wow.
a nurse called me over to sit with a woman who was very close to death, because her husband, who'd been sitting with her, had become very, very distressed, and she was just going to take him aside for a moment.
Mm.
And I remember I leant over her, and she opened her eyes and she said, "My name's Isabel." And I just said, "Oh, you know, I'm Rachel. I'm just going to sit with you for a moment." And she died very shortly after that. And that
Oh.
was such a strong uh experience, because what I realized was that she was herself in death.
Mm. Yeah.
And, you know, as a young person, like, death is so far away, you know, it's so alien. And the idea that I might be myself in death, that I might know death,
Mm.
really stayed with me. Um, and I've been really open to entering that experience as myself, if that makes sense.
Oh,
Uh,
lovely.
yeah. So
Oh, she gave great gifts. Is it Isabel gave you a great gift then, didn't she?
she did. And it's, you know, because I went on then to work with children who were dying. And of course, we often think of children who are dying as dying out of time, you know, before their time. Um, and I'm not sure that that's a helpful way of framing it.
No.
You know, we all die just on time. Um, and and the most important thing is to find for ourselves that we're comfortable with dying just on time.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think that is about how you choose to think about it. Because, you know, if I know some people do think that a death of whatever kind shouldn't have happened, and maybe make the rest of their lives about campaigning about the fact that this shouldn't have happened. And that's fine, that's their prerogative. And so long as it makes them feel good, I think that's okay. And maybe it does for some people because they're making meaning out of that death. But if you're not feeling good about it, then it's like life's too short to not feel good, actually. And that was one of the things I really took out of Philip's death. It's like I was 54 when he died, and I was like, blimey, hopefully I've got a whole lot of life next left to live, but it could happen to me at any time. I need to make sure that I'm enjoying myself as much as possible.
Yes, yes, yes. And I think it does, it brings the importance of life into sharp focus.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
And like you say, even if what comes next is even better,
Mm,
like it's still good to take pleasure in what we've got here.
very much so. Very much so. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many layers to this.
We could carry on talking for a long time about all sorts of things that we've just sort of had a little taste of.
Yes, yes. I mean, I think for me, working alongside people who are contemplating their death or processing grief, um, one of the most important things is being open to the experience.
Mhm.
Like pain is so intense, and somehow just allowing ourselves to pass through that experience, or allowing the pain to pass through us, whichever whichever way it works,
Yeah,
um, and almost surrendering to it on some level.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, absolutely. It is a surrender to it if you can, or a letting go, or however you want to put it. But yeah.
and is there anything from Philip's last weeks that you've used to kind of guide as a guide for your life now?
Um, he in his last few days, it was his 66th birthday, and his daughter gave him a gift, which was um a, having a star, a star up in the sky named after him, and he could name it whatever he wanted. I just thought he'd name it Philip Rogers, but actually he named it Love is the Answer. And I was so touched about this. I knew exactly where it was for quite a long time after he died. I would look up and I would think, Love is the answer. There he is behind there. And I know it's a really common saying, love is the answer. I know that people say it all the time and don't necessarily feel it. But actually, if you are willing to stay with it, it answers a lot, if not everything.
Yes.
So that was a great and that was an unexpected gift in those last few days. That was just really lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Love is the answer. Or maybe that's a lovely note to end on.
Yeah.
Love is the
Yeah,
answer. We'll carry that with us.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jane. It's been
Okay.
really wonderful to talk to you. And we look forward to seeing what unfolds in your life and work in the
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Embracing Miracles podcast. If you would like to know how the grief recovery method can help you move beyond the pain of loss, book a free session with me using the link below.